Assalamu alaikum and hello everyone. I'm your host Hannah Zuberi and welcome back to another episode of Justice for All Now. The annual country reports are out and we'll be discussing Burma, India and China's reports with the Justice for All team. The annual country reports on human rights practices, also known as the Human Rights Reports by the State Department, covers internationally recognized individuals, civil, political, and workers' rights, as set forth in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and other international agreements. The Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, says that they are a vital source for governments, researchers, advocacy groups, journalists, and voices of conscience worldwide that work to promote respect for human rights and accountability for injustice. The individual reports cover 198 countries and territories, providing information based on credible reports of the events that the State Department has observed occurred throughout 2022. Um, the State Department says that the reports are meticulously compiled by the US Department of State employees in Washington, D.C., and at overseas missions throughout the world. And, uh, you know, we've talked to staffers who say they collectively spend thousands of hours preparing the reports using information from US embassies and consulates abroad, foreign government officials, non government and international organizations, jurists, legal experts, journalists, academics, human rights defenders, labor activists, and other published reports. And the State Department says that they take very seriously their responsibility to ensure accuracy. So let's get to the crux of this. We're going to be discussing Burma, India, and China. And our guests today are Zahir Adil. Zahir Adil is the lead of the Save India from Fascism campaign of Justice for All. He's an engineer by training, and he's had a keen interest in human rights for many years. Having grown up in India, he often talks of his Hindu friends that he had and how many in India now see such friendships disappearing. He joins us from the Boston area. Welcome, Zahir.
Thank you for having me, Hannah.
Also with us is Adam Carroll, who's been working with Justice for All for the last 10 years, especially assisting the flagship program Burma Task Force and serving as a point person at the United Nations, where Justice for All is an accredited NGO. Adam has a background in human rights programming, community service, and Muslim community media. In addition to his interest in civil liberties globally and in the US, Adam is active in promoting and deepening interfaith dialogue, mainly in New York City, but looking to broaden his horizons beyond its borders. Welcome, Adam.
Thank you.
Joining us also is Rizwan Gul Nur Mohammed. She's an Uyghur advocate and a co-founder of Empower Communities Charitable Trust. Rizwan Gul's brother, Maulan Nur Mohammed, was arbitrarily detained by the Chinese Communist Party in January 2017. And she's been a vocal advocate for his release ever since. Despite facing intimidation from Chinese authorities, both in New Zealand and the United States, Rizwan Gul continues to speak up for her brother and the Uyghur community. She's worked as a program manager associate for Justice for All, an advocacy organization that campaigns for Uyghurs through the Save Uyghur campaign. Assalamu alaikum, Rizwan Gul. How's New Zealand treating you?
Thank you for having me, Hannah Zubairi. It's good to see the team again here. Thank you for having me again. New Zealand is treating me well. Thank you.
Great. Okay, let's get down to the State Department reports. Zahir, let's start with India. On India, members of, I'm reading this language, members of the security forces committed some abuses. On Kashmir, they call freedom fighters terrorists in Jammu and Kashmir, northeastern state, and Maoist terrorism affected areas. So I see a lot of freedom fighters being referred to as terrorism, whether they're in Kashmir or in other parts of India. And the tone of this year's State Department report seems markedly different from last year's report. So let's discuss this in detail. What did you find? How did you find the report this year? What stuck out to you?
I mean, they say one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist. But freedom fighters in Kashmir, freedom fighters in Mizoram, in the eastern states of India, should not be considered necessarily as terrorists, at least by the United States. The India portion of this year is actually very disappointed. It's written as though it's been written by a soft apologist for the Indian government, and that may be because some soft apologist sitting at the US Embassy in Delhi has pretty much written the report. But in most of these cases, the Indian government is presented as doing the right thing, is taking the steps necessary to lessen it. And that language can be read over and over and over again in this year's report. It is markedly different from last year. I thought last year's report was much better presented, although some parts were missing in that. But instead of getting better, it's actually become much worse. So, of the past few years, I think it's the least effective report. If I'd say it's the worst report I have read so far in the last few years, or at least on the India issues.
Well, I agree, and we don't have our Kashmir team lead over here, but I'd like to mention terrorism is mentioned in reference to Kashmir many, many times, but there's no mention of many civilians killed in Jammu and Kashmir. Just in February, there were 45 detentions and arrests and 15 killings of civilians in Kashmir. There's also no mention of the death of Altaf Shah, a Kashmiri pro-freedom fighter, who is the son-in-law of Gilani, Vice Gilani, who's been in prison for the past 5 years for advocating for the rights, for his rights to self-determination of Kashmiris. And he passed away after he was diagnosed with renal cancer and not given any medical care. So this is some of the things that I'm noticing as I was reading through the India section, is that there is as you said, a very focused apologist sort of tone to this year's report. And what else did you find that concerned you?
Well, coming back to Kashmir for a moment, see, the United States does recognize Kashmir as a disputed region. So I really wish that there was a separate section on Kashmir altogether and it was not clubbed together with India. Because when you do this, then you're implicitly implying that Kashmir is part of India, perhaps. But that's something that I can wish for, and it may not actually happen. The other thing, some of the good. So let's also talk a little bit about the good that has been in the report. I mean, obviously, the report does talk about abuses that are happening in many, many different categories, and they list those out. So just on the first page itself, they will talk about extrajudicial killings or life-threatening prison conditions. So at least those categories, those conditions are being recognized, are being acknowledged by the State Department here. But when you read through the report and you go through each one of them, then it becomes, then that apologist nature is very, very clear. That's one. The other thing is that I think really these reports also need to look at some cases that have happened in India as particular cases. For example, if you read through the very short description of Siddiq Kappan, he was a journalist that had gone to the city of Hathras in the state of Uttar Pradesh, where a young Dalit girl had been raped, and they were arrested on what is widely regarded as drummed up charges by the Indian authorities. And in this report, it's those very charges that are mentioned as he was arrested under foreign exchange. I'm not quite sure how exactly it's termed at this point, but but it's very disappointing from that point of view. And the same thing happens with the Bilkis Banu case. So they need to take these cases, analyze them in the context of the people who are in India's government. And also in the case of Bilkis Banu, when her attackers, when the rapists were let go, and the report conveniently mentions it when their time for parole had come. So essentially giving it a legal background. But they do not talk about how these same rapists were received by supporters of the Modi government. All of that adds to the human rights abuses. All of that goes to show that these groups, whether it's the RSS or the BJP, they are abetting and they are encouraging the human rights abuses to occur and to increase in India. And I think the State Department needs to be, I'm sure that they are cognizant of it, they're just not reporting it, but they should.
From what I hear, there's currently no one at the India desk at the State Department. I'm also hearing that there has been just a lack um, of withdrawal, where people are at the State Department are sort of looking the other way because to pacify India. I wanted to talk what you had mentioned just a little while earlier about the sections. So the sections are a standard of the State Department report. Those sections will apply to every country in the world. So if you picked up any of the country reports, you'll see those sections. What is interesting about India, what they have done is they have just said these, this is enshrined in law. The Constitution guarantees XYZ rights, but there's no analysis of how that Constitution is even being implemented or how the judiciary has been affected under the Modi regime. Did you find, I would like your comments on that.
Yeah, I haven't found anything where the judiciary has been shown as being complicit with the Modi regime. In fact, in almost all cases, there's again that sort of excuse being made for the judicial process, saying that they are they're trying to do it and they are implementing uh, some tribunal somewhere, and they need to get more judges on. So there's almost, like I said, that soft apologetics viewpoint. And in some cases, it's also contradicting. I mean, in the case of sexual harassment, I was reading this, I was smiling as I was. Unfortunately, it's not a thing to smile about, but just the way that it's written. Sexual harassment remained a serious problem, and obviously it has been. India is almost known as the rape capital of the world at this point. And then it says laws addressing sexual harassment were effectively enforced. Well, if they were effectively enforced, guess what? That sexual harassment would have gone down. It wouldn't have happened. So it's contradictory in many, many cases.
There's another jaw-dropping section that was just threw me for a loop. It says defendants enjoy the presumption of innocence except as described under UAPA conditions and may choose their counsels. The Constitution specifies the state should provide free legal counsel to defendants who cannot afford to ensure that opportunities for securing justice are not denied to any citizen. But circumstances often limited access to competent counsels. I mean, it's just so, it was almost a joke. And then they say an overburdened justice system resulted in lengthy delays in court cases, with depositions sometimes taking more than a decade. Then the section on media freedom is also laughable on a day when Rajiv Gandhi has been jailed for calling Modi a thief. What did you find particularly interesting about the section on media?
Well, I mean, I just think, uh, I don't think it was really analyzed to the point it should be. I mean, it doesn't talk about how most of the media essentially runs the government line. It doesn't. It just talks about press freedoms and media freedoms in a very, very, very cursory sort of manner. So that inner analysis that I would expect from a State Department report, the what's happening behind the scenes, I think that actually needs to be done a lot more. I'm hoping that the State Department realizes that they cannot just rely on some Modi apologist sitting in the US Embassy to write these reports and actually get somebody at the India desk to, over here in the United States, to at least read the report before putting it out.
To stop this genocide, we need your help.
A free 3-minute online chat can give you the personalized tips you need to start boosting your retirement savings today.
Welcome back. That was a great discussion with Zahir Adil on the India section of the State Department 2022 Human Rights Report. Now let's move on to Burma. Welcome, Adam, and let's discuss this. So Adam, what was going on through your mind as you were reading the Burma section of this year's Human Rights Report?
Well, thanks for asking. You know, it has its pluses and minuses. First of all, I certainly approve of human rights reports by country, and you know, it's quite interesting to read, even at random, the various reports out there. Unfortunately, Muslim nations have a pretty bad record on human rights, but it's quite interesting to hear the details. But when I read Burma's, and of course Burma is has one of the worst human rights records in the world, so it's not possible to be an apologist, but to see where the strengths and weaknesses are. And it, like Zahir was saying regarding India, it can lack context, and it also it tends to be a bit legalistic. It's a checklist. There's certain sections they have to fill out, and of course there's a lot of detail about how the government of Burma, the military authorities, are undermining democracy, disappearing people, murdering people, raping. I mean, it goes on, and I think we all know that terrible things are happening in Burma. There's also sections on LGBT, and there's sections on labor rights. So I mean, it's again going through a checklist, but with some quite interesting details, some stuff I didn't know. But mostly it's the same old stuff. And I would say that it leaves out the role of propaganda, as I think Zahir was mentioning. It leaves out the role of Buddhist nationalism this year, though that is not the only engine of hatred against the Rohingya. It's an important one, and it's an important base of support for the military. It leaves out all the enablers like India and like Russia and China that sell arms to Burma. I mean, it's a huge thing. It keeps them afloat, and you would think the State Department would want to include that. It also doesn't go into the sanctions question about the oil and gas sector. So there's definitely some gaps. I would say, you know, Justice for All tend to center its Burma Task Force work on the Rohingya. And certainly since the genocide has been recognized formally by the US government, and last year during the report's period of study, I would expect more on that. And instead it was shoehorned into these sections. So there was a lot more about the Rohingya that was said in the Bangladesh country report. In fact, that has some very good stuff. I mean, not good, but detailed and useful reporting. And in fact, you know, I can go into a little more detail about Bangladesh in a second, but you know, the State Department report comes down quite hard against some of the abuses like Basan Char, the corruption of the local police, the lack of security in the camps, and the lack of rights to travel. A lot of issues there. So it's a mixed report card, I would say, but it's welcome. And I would say that the strengths come from the NGO sector, which the State Department relies on to collect this data. And there's an organization that we all rely on to some extent when we want to hear about what's happening in Burma, because it's really hard sometimes to get information. There's the AAPP, which is the Assistance Association for Political Prisoners. They show up again and again in the report. There are other NGOs too that play an important role, and I think a lot of the strengths come from that.
Okay, so we're going to go to Rizwan Gul now and to discuss the China section of this report. Thank you, Rizwan Gul.
Thank you
So
for having me. Mm-hmm.
As I was reading this report, I saw that Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, in his statement mentioned China. And he says, and he uses the Chinese terminology in Xinjiang for that region, occupied East Turkestan. He says, in Xinjiang, the People's Republic of China, the country report describes how genocide and crimes against humanity continue to occur against predominantly Muslim Uyghurs and members of other ethnic religious minority groups. So even in his opening statement, China is highlighted, the genocide is highlighted, and it's really focused. Did you find this focus also in depth in the report itself?
Thank you for having me. This report, I found it's quite comprehensive. As you said, that it really gives an overall picture of the human rights violations that Uyghur people are facing under the Chinese regime. So it covered very well. But as we are requested to be critical on this report, what I can say is that the context can still be improved, because I couldn't see any single names of the camp survivors in the report. They have the camp survivors, for example, Zumret Tursun, Mihri Gül, and Tursunay, those who are now living in the US. They have given countless witnesses and testimonies for their experience in the camps and outside camps, even their experience of the transnational repression on the US soil. But I couldn't see any of their names in the report. I think that when giving the specific examples can only improve the report's credibility, and also it gives more, it can enrich the context of it, because this report is now organized in just by tick boxes. Like in each section, there is still the ways to include those personal stories to improve the credibility, and as well as make it make it more valuable to share the personal experience. This is very important because those Muslim countries, especially now, they have been requested by the Chinese government to believe that the Uyghur cause, the Uyghur genocide, is only US propaganda. That's why I think that when you produce such report, it's very important to include personal stories, personal examples. I can see a couple of names over there. For example, when it's about transnational repression, Qalbinur Ghani was mentioned, who was directly approached by the Chinese authorities to request it to be silent. I can see that one example, but where are the rest of the examples? This report also mainly based on reports by the media, civil societies, some NGOs, which is great. But again, if I come back to my point, is that specific some personal stories, testimonies should be included in the report to make it more credible and give enrich the context itself.
Thank you so much for that, Rizwan Gul. We're going to stop for a quick break and we'll be right back after these messages.
To stop this genocide, we need your help.
A free 3-minute online chat can give you the personalized tips you need to start boosting your retirement savings today.
Welcome back. So we'll continue our discussion about the China section of the report. Rizwan Gul, do you think it harms the cause, particularly as this report, is relatively one of the stronger reports that the State Department has in its entire, armory? Is this harmful to the Uyghur cause, or is it helpful?
No, it is helpful. It is no way harmful. It is helpful because this report can be used our advocacy work and the government's diplomacy work, as well as for research and educate the general public about the Uyghur genocide. Also, can be used to take China accountable for its genocide and human rights violations. But if we think from the Muslim nation perspective, especially given the context that it has been known over there that Uyghur genocide is a Chinese is a U.S. propaganda.
Mhm.
From their perspective, this report can be harmful to the Uyghur cause because they would say that hey, this report again only promoting the U.S. Perspective that how they are using Uyghur cause to fight with China. Maybe from that perspective, it is harmful, but I think overall, this credible, comprehensive report is very important for the Uyghur cause.
Very interesting. So to discuss this more, we'll have Zahir and Adam back on, and I really wanted to ask you, Brother Zahir, that as you look at these reports and you see the strength of the China report and the relative strength of the Burma report compared to the soft handling of India, how does this play into number one, the geostrategic implications of that, of United States foreign policy towards these countries? And I also wanted to touch on the fact that Amnesty, which is, the United States government does rely often on Amnesty's reporting, was kicked out of India for the past year and has not been active in India all of 2022. So how would that have implemented? So first, let's address geostrategy, and then we'll talk about NGOs such as Amnesty.
Sure. I think it is very clear how geopolitical strategies and the positioning that the United States thinks of having these countries in does affect the reporting in these reports. I mean, it's very clear that India has not had anything brought against them. It's just been slap on the wrist sort of statements for everything that's been happening in India. And the same thing follows in this report. It's a slap on the wrist, or even less so. Now, you compare that with China. Obviously, the Biden administration is seeing China as a major threat, and has been trying to actually coddle India. So they want to see India as the next manufacturing base, so that manufacturing can go from China and go to India. They also see India as part of this of the Quad, and all of that Quad has to. The entire reason for the Quad to exist is to counter China. And so it is to the State Department's interest to report more accurately and in a better detail about the human rights abuses that are happening in China. And that's a good thing because that detail is important. But that detail needs to be shown in other reports also. In the case of Burma, I think the United States is more neutral because it does not see itself as a great influencer. And again, in the case of Burma, you have China and Russia, two countries that are seen as adversaries by the United States, doing work over there, supporting the Burmese junta and the military government there. And so again, it's to the United States' benefit to come out and report accurately at least to a certain extent on Burma. Unfortunately, now you come to the other side of the coin. So now you see them as adversaries and you report accurately, but now you're trying to coddle India, and so you try to sweep things under the rug as far as India's human rights abuses are concerned. And I think that is really it's a horrible way to approach things. Human rights are human rights. It doesn't matter whether you have some geopolitical interest in a country or not, but the reporting needs to be accurate.
So true.
It's
Adam,
not only Amnesty. Yeah, please go ahead. You were saying something?
I was just asking if Adam, if he'd like to comment on that.
Sure.
No, I agree with Zahir about that. Double standards undermine the credibility of these reports. And I believe that they're probably pieced together like sausage making in Congress, with many editors. And I imagine that sometimes things get softened for political reasons. And I also believe some people involved in the process mean well. So it's never going to be perfect, but I think, as with Israel as well as India, it's very easy to point at soft criticism rather than detailed and effective criticism. But I do want to acknowledge that, many countries will reject any criticism. Amnesty International said that the State Department report on Mexico was too soft, but then Mexico called the State Department liars. So, no one likes to be criticized, but some countries are really have no tolerance for it. And as with Bangladesh, Bangladesh also, started targeting NGOs that were quoted in the State Department report. I invited one of their directors, but they were too intimidated right now. The government in Bangladesh is hinting that they shouldn't be operating at all. So it's no one likes criticism, but it's very important to criticize fairly.
Rizwan Gul, did you feel, as we were talking about China and talking about human rights concerns in China, in the rest of China as well, as you were reading the report, were there things that surprised you that were covered in China that perhaps you didn't know about in other parts of the country? Rizwan Gul, did you feel, as we were talking about China and talking about human rights concerns in China, in the rest of China as well, as you were reading the report, were there things that surprised you that were covered in China that perhaps you didn't know about in other parts of the country?
Hannah, could you please repeat the question?
Sure. Awesome if you could note the time. Yes, I was just asking, as you were reading through the China report, were there aspects of human rights concerns in other parts of China that perhaps were new to you, and could you share those with us?
Thank you for this question. And this report, again, is very comprehensive one. And when we look at how Uyghurs are experiencing, most of the experience from under the Chinese regime is included in this report. So in every section, there is Uyghurs mentioned, And also the others, if it's applicable, Tibet and Hong Kong, they are mentioned as well. So there is no, actually, what we can see is that all these communities, they are suffering from different ways. So there is no really say that this is missed out. You can't really say that in this report because it's quite well covered. But what is interesting is that, as we heard from Brother Zahir and Adam, that the media, the official media in India and Burma was not mentioned. But in this report, it was mentioned clearly that and the media's role in this Chinese oppressive regime. It is clearly said that the media is continued to harass and defame those who spoke up about the injustice and the human rights violations. They also clearly said that the PRC Chinese media has been playing important role in discrediting the Uyghurs who are living overseas. Their testimony, they speak up for their relatives. This is clearly said there. So it is very, very positive inclusion here that the media's role in the Chinese oppressive genocidal regime. So this is very good. And this can be, actually, this part can be more detailed. What else?
You know what?
Yeah.
You just mentioned something that really
Mm.
it brought back something. This was a critique that we had done of the State Department report, even in previous years, especially on India. While the Chinese report clearly identifies that the Chinese Communist Party and their ideology is what is driving these human rights concerns in that region, it does not extend the same analysis to India and brings up Hindu nationalism or Hindutva ideology and how it has played out in these human rights concerns. Nor does in the Burma report does it talk about Burmese Burmese superiority, supremacy, or the Buddhist ideology. That is to Buddhist nationalism. Those were things, like what I like about the China report. There is a framework that they look through. They look at everything through a framework, and the framework is understanding and dissecting the Chinese Communist Party and its role in conducting genocide and oppression throughout the country. Whereas this is not extended to these other regions that we're analyzing right now.
I think if I can add one thing here is that this media's role is actually mentioned under the transnational repression section. I think this is where the difference may come from, because the diaspora communities of Uyghurs and Tibetans and the Han Chinese and other people originally from China, we are experiencing the transnational repression. And it has been also mentioned in some statements in the United States State of Department statements. I think that makes a difference. That's why it is important that the media's role is mentioned, but this is coming under the transnational repression. I think this is something that can be also looked at in India's and the Burma's context.
Interesting. So we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with Adam and Zahir.
To stop this genocide, we need your help.
A free 3-minute online chat can give you the personalized tips you need to start boosting your retirement savings today.
Welcome back. So as we were comparing the three regions and how they are being analyzed by the State Department and in its report, some themes have come up about media responsibility or transnational repression. There's recently been a bill that has been introduced by Senator Cardin, I believe Senator Haggerty, as well as others, which talks about the transnational repression of particularly Uyghurs and other ethnic communities targeted by the People's Republic of China. Now, this bill is especially interesting, coming in at a time where the Uyghur Policy Act is not getting the traction that it should have gotten last Congress. And keeping that in mind, and looking at all these geopolitical aspects of this, one of the things that is quite a big concern is climate justice. And we're hearing that Western countries want China's cooperation in climate justice, and therefore they're actually being softer on China, or not bringing up the Uyghur cause in many of or human rights causes, not just the Uyghur cause, but other human rights causes, when it is in talks with China. So this is something interesting and I'd like to get all of your comments on that. How, where do these interests need to stop, and in your analysis, where is it absolutely imperative that we hold governments responsible, and how can this report as it is be used to hold these governments responsible?
Okay.
Adam?
Maybe I'll start with that. Well, climate justice is something that should be concerning all of us. That's the biggest threat that humanity faces. I mean, all life on the planet faces that threat. And so that's an important one to approach with different countries. However, my concern is that if we are going to give leeways to China, to Burma, to India, to whichever other country out there, saying that, we need to have them on board for climate justice, so we are going to be a little soft with them on human rights issues, I don't think that's a good idea, because those countries, when they are doing this as an agenda, a political agenda, as a means to retain power, or a means to keep a certain section of their populations suppressed, and not allowing them to progress to the same level as other population segments in the country would, then that persecution is just going to increase, because those countries see the leeway that they are given because of climate justice as a means to just go after these populations even more. So I think it needs to be separate. I think it needs to be clearly stated that climate action is needed, and it is affecting not only the Americans, it's not only affecting Canadians or Burmese, it's affecting everybody. It's affecting everybody regardless of where they are. Even things that are happening in China would affect people in Botswana. That is something that needs to be understood, but we cannot sacrifice the people who are being persecuted in those countries because of that reason. Yeah, sorry.
I would jump in and say I totally agree. If I hope the sound is working. Whether it's regarding climate justice or other issues, trade, or just economic considerations, human rights needs to be part of those discussions, not a separate discussion, not just a separate dialogue with experts. So I think we need to make sure that this is always integrated into the other considerations and other policies. You brought up transnational repression, and I was surprised to read in the Bangladesh report that Bangladesh actually engages in that towards its nationals abroad. I didn't know that. So I do recommend that people read these reports, even if you have a grain of salt, read them. And I do want to say that one unfortunate drawback, it's a very simple point, is that at least the Burma report was not up to date. It was several months, perhaps as many as 5 months out of date. And it shouldn't take that many months to get approval for a report to be released. So again, I hope they will change that next year.
Thank you so much to all of you for being here today and for your thoughts and going through this report. We urge, as Justice for All, we urge everybody to do take a look at these countries' reports, use them, share them with your interfaith partners, share them again, clips of them with your elected officials, just so people can understand that human rights are important and they are being observed even from afar, and these things should not just be, put away in some think tank's, library, but should be used. So, if any of you have some parting words, otherwise, we're coming to the end of our show.
I may add
Well,
something. Go ahead.
Well, I'm just, why don't both of us go ahead together?
After you.
Yeah.
Ramadan Mubarak to you.
Ramadan Mubarak, and hopefully the month brings with it blessings so that these persecutions stop. That's one. But really, persecutions are going to stop when our viewers get involved. So I'd really encourage everyone, read the reports, get back to the State Department, tell them what you like about it, what you don't like about it. Thank them if you think that what your country was treated well. Tell them no, you need to do more if you think your country was not treated to the same degree that you would have liked it to be done. But yeah, you need to get involved. So I'm going to leave with that. And again, Ramadan Mubarak to everybody.
I just would like to say that I am agree with both comments of Brother Zahir and Adam. If I reiterate that, when it comes to human rights violations, especially in genocide, and if you consider climate and other issues, you can't say that we need to be hard on this, and we have to have this side of climate change and other things. We have to be soft on it. You can't do that, because if you, as Brother Zahir mentioned earlier, that if you gave this leverage for them to be soft on one side, you are actually compromising your values on the human rights and genocide, these sides. So you have to be strict. If it's genocide, you have to put all the effort to stop it. It has been 5 years, even earlier, that Uyghur people have been killed, arbitrarily detained in many ways, which is actually mentioned in the report, that how people are forced disappeared. So this has to stop. You can't say that we have to have deals with this climate change, and so we have to be soft on this. You can't say that. To protect the climate is everyone's responsibility. As Brother Zahir mentioned, that if China does not take care of their climate, and they will suffer, and they will make others neighboring, even like we are suffering from the global climate in New Zealand significantly. So it is their responsibility. So we have to hard on those issues that is related to human rights violations and genocide. Again, I also emphasize that this is a responsibility not only for governments. This is a responsibility of every single individual that is living on this earth. So we have to take these governments accountable by also reading these reports and give feedback and reach out to the Congress people or representatives to show them that we care about this, and we would like to see the improvement and in policies as well as their implementations. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all of you for being here, and thank you for all of you for watching. This was the Justice for All Now show. Thanks to my producer, Asim, and to our associate producer, Mariam. Thanks from all of us from the Justice for All Now show.